I also wanted to do a quick plug for our next upcoming program on Save the Date for Saturday, April 23rd from 9 to noon. Dana Mitroff-Silvers is going to be having a design thinking workshop at John F. Kennedy University in Berkeley, and it is limited to 37 registrants, so you should sign up now to make sure you have a spot. And then I also wanted to remind everybody about your blue evaluations. We'll be collecting them in the back after the program is over. And we hope that you can join us right after the program. Right next door at the Story Cloud, we hope that we can keep the conversation flowing. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Moja.
Hi everybody, welcome. Tonight's program is called Voices from the Community. And the theme of this month's program builds on the Cultural Connections program that we did in December 2014 at the lab entitled Activism, Relevancy, and Community Engagement. We found that conversation organically focused on community and what is community and why and how does an institution need to connect with their communities. So in this program tonight, we will hear directly from folks who share their knowledge and expertise as advisors to help cultural institutions become more inclusive and accessible. So you might ask, what are we doing in this space here? La Peña for decades has been an outlet for Latin American politics and a venue to show art, music, poetry, and dance performances, as well as a community meeting space. We decided to have this program here to immerse ourselves in a place that has been central to bringing people together on current social and political issues. You can find out more at lapeña.org. So tonight we'll have our first talk show style program with our host Indra Mangal, who will be in conversation with Chris Johnson, Huang An Nguyen, and Vince Medina. So I'll read some of their short bios so you can know them a little bit before they start. Indra Mangal is the Asian Art Museum's Community Engagement Officer. She has served in a similar capacity for both the Oakland Museum of California and KQED's Educational Department. She has extensive experience facilitating meaningful collaborations with community organizations, producing highly successful events and programs, as well as managing large-scale projects. Indra's role at the Asian Art Museum is to build relationships with community organizations and individuals, identify opportunities for museum participation in community events and initiatives, develop new strategies and partnerships, and facilitate community participation on museum projects and research with the goal of building the museum's relevancy as a cultural and community asset. Chris Johnson is a photographic and video artist, curator, and published writer. He studied photography with Ansel Adams, Imogen Cunningham, and Wynne Bullock, and his work is in collections nationwide. He is currently a full professor of photography at the California College of Arts and was my professor. Chris has served on numerous boards for Bay Area cultural institutions and has published the Practical Zone System for Film and Digital Photography, currently in its 5th edition. In 1996, he produced an innovative one-hour video piece entitled Question Bridge that investigates class issues within the Black community. The current version of this project, Question Bridge Black Males, was produced with Hank Willis Thomas and appeared simultaneously at the Brooklyn Museum and Oakland Museums, and also opened at the Sundance Film Festival in 2012. A version of it was also exhibited at the Exploratorium in San Francisco. It is the 2015 winner of the International Center of Photography's Infinity Award. Chris was a creative leader for the major 2015 Oakland Museum of California installation, Who is Oakland? Vince Medina is a language activist, blogger, and curator. He was born in his ancestral Yaqui Ohlone homeland, strongly aware and proud of his Ohlone identity. He works to educate others of the continuous Ohlone presence and to dispel negative stereotypes of his people. While living in two worlds, both contemporary and traditional, he strives to bring Ohlone culture into the modern era in multiple ways, including working diligently to reawaken his native Chochenyo Ohlone language. Vince serves on the board of directors for the Advocates of Indigenous California Language Survival and was recently brought on to Yocha Dehe's Living Language Circle Board, which connects teachers of California Indian languages together. An associate curator at Mission Dolores of San Francisco, he has developed a fair, honest portrayal of the effects of the missions on the Ohlone people and the cultural resistance that came with that. Vince also works at Heyday Books, a publishing company that often produces books by and about California Indians, and the magazine News from Native California. He hosts Bay Native Circle, a radio program on KPFA Wednesdays at 7 p.m. that focuses on Indian culture in the San Francisco Bay Area. Huang An Wen, I'm working on it, is on the Vietnamese Advisory Committee for the Children's Discovery Museum in San Jose. She came to America in 1984 as a teenager. After several futile attempts to escape Vietnam by fishing boat, she and her brother finally were able to land in Indonesia and from there flown to New York. Every year on April 30th, she shares her journey's memories with others, especially with the the American-born generation of Vietnamese, so they will remember how Vietnamese settled in the United States after the communists took over in southern Vietnam in 1975. Huang An has extensive training in working with at-risk youth and families in trouble. She worked as a Vietnamese youth coordinator and outreach specialist and taught high school chemistry before her children were born. She has been recognized and received awards for her volunteer efforts, including work with hospice organizations, Project Cornerstone, mental health first aid, and multiple language advocate models for the Asian Women's Shelter. She's a foreign language educator at Duc Vien Pagoda in San Jose. She volunteers because she believes kindness is the greatest wisdom. Kindness is like a boomerang. It always returns. So with that, let's get started. Inja, take it away.
Thank you, Nadja. Woo. I think we should give a round of applause to Nadja, Jessica, and Rebecca Granados, who's not here. You have just been taken very good care of. Thank you. So I'm really excited to be here. This is a topic, for those of you who worked with me previously, this is a topic very near and dear to my heart, both professionally and personally. So I'm excited to be with some new friends up here. We're going to have a conversation up here for about an hour, a little over an hour, and then we'll have a Q&A time. We'll have about 25 minutes for Q&A. So we're just going to take it away and begin our conversation. And I have a few prepped topics and conversations. And the first one is thinking about museums and really what is the benefit to museums. Oh, by the way, here. We'd like you to speak in the microphones because not all of us can. Let's get this. And then I'll bring on the question. They're all on. So I'd like to hear from you all, from your perspective, what are the benefits to museums to have community advisors and process and to really bring the community and advise them on exhibitions or programs? Would you like to execute?
Sure.
No.
Sure. So if the question is why would it be in the community's museums' interest to do it? Mm-hmm. I think that museums are always looking for ways to stay relevant. And one of the best ways to sort of break out of the historic role that museums have as sort of conservatives of history and as reifiers of what's considered to be the elite parts of culture. It's important for them to try to understand who are the current audiences that could use museums. And so they need to know who those people are. They need to know what those values are. They need to find the relevant ways of reflecting. So I think that's why it's in their interest to do it, especially as museums are looking for viable ways to fund themselves. They're no longer the beneficiaries of patronage from those elite classes. And so if the community is going to actually support them, they need to feel as if their values are represented there. So I think some of those are some of the pragmatic reasons. I think there are spiritual, if you will, reasons for doing it as well. But maybe I'll just pass it on to you.
from me, I think museum is the place that the communities gathering together. I married with 2 girls, and both of my daughters grew up with the museum. I took them there, Children Discovery Museum, since I was little. You know, instead of going somewhere, we, as a family, we went there. We taught them, you know, little things. They have different age, you know, like for preschool and then kindergarten, something they can hand on, touch on, and we can talk about it. It's just a place that, you know, family can be together, like children, parents, grandparents, and that's what we try to do right now, to outreach it to our communities, because Vietnamese people in San Jose is the largest population in the United States after Vietnam, after we get here, you know. That's where we settle. So we try to send a message so people can come to museums.
So that is the benefit to that museum having you, is to get the word out about the museum. Do you also see other benefits to the museum to have you at the table? So you're getting the word out. Are you also advising them on?
Oh yes, I go. Yes, because to send a message to my people, you know, like how to work with the Vietnamese people. They need to know our culture. They need to know what we like, what we think. It's a whole long process. I've been with them for 8 years, and I'm so, you know, honored to be there. And this is the time that I can give back what I earned, you know, from the museum. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
Sure. Okay. Hello, everybody. I couldn't only speak for myself, but I know having an Ohlone presence in museums and having Ohlone consultation has been, in a lot of ways, it's been this decolonizing effort to take away from what anthropologists and such have always shared about our cultures for California Indian people in general. And being able to have an indigenous influence and have Ohlone people take that narrative and describe it in our own words, and describe our family histories, describe our culture, and the perseverance with our own voices. I think it's this holistic way to heal, and to be able to show the world how rich our culture is. And for a long time, this didn't happen. I know this whole idea of consulting people from the Ohlone community and from other Indian communities in California is something that's very recent. I know as recent as my father's generation, it was primarily the anthropologists who told museums about Indian culture and described it. And being able now to use our own voice to say, you know, this is our reality. These are the beauties and these are the struggles. I think that it paints a clearer picture, and it is more honest, gives an honest portrayal. And like I said, it's a way for us to decolonize our history.
Yeah, I think that I want to echo something that Vince said, because I think that if most people think of the history of museum in American culture, it really is an aspiration that the museum would be a place where families gather. That's not the way I understood museums when I was growing up. And I think, considering that museums historically were the byproduct of patronage and personal collections, and then they sort of became, as I said, the repository of pillage from other cultures. I mean, that's the way people, I think museum directors in the 21st century are trying to push against that history and trying to find a more contemporary relevance in a world that's increasingly diversified. And it would be a wonderful thing, I think, if museums routinely were seen as places where families come together and where cultures come to learn about themselves, not because of things that have been extracted from those cultures, but because they are places where there's an exchange between the cultures and the museum. It's usually a one-way exchange where we have the things that are considered to be valuable. Please come and see those things. I think museums are trying to shift that paradigm, and that's part of what I think this conversation is about.
It's probably easier with the Children's Discovery Museum than where I work at the Asian Art Museum, right?
That's why
it's
I only
really-
speak on my perspective, you know, for Children's Museum and how we grew up with it. Yeah. but I agree with him 100%.
Anything to add? This is a hard one also, is when you come to the table, when the museum invites you in as an advisor and you become the single voice representing your whole community, and we all know that our communities are not, there's not a monolithic perspective, and I'm just wondering how that is for you to be called in, and often you're the only one. You know, what is that like? How do you manage that? Do you want to, maybe someone else start this time? Maybe Vince.
Sure. So what I will often ask when people, because I've done quite a lot of museum advisory work, and what I like to make clear is that, you know, I want to make sure that when they're bringing on consultants, that they don't have a plan that's already concrete, because often what will happen, and I've seen this in my own experiences, is that museums will bring in Indian people or an Indian person, and a lot of that is to say just that they work with an Indian person, but they already have in their mind an idea of what they want to develop. And often what happens is our voices, you know, and a lot of times we're going and not getting paid, we're making our own time over to these places, and everybody else is on the clock except for us. And we're doing this because it's the right thing to do, because we want an accurate experience to be told. But then often our voices are relegated or they're ignored. And there's no problem those putting on the text or the label copy that there was a Ohlone consultation. And so what I make sure, you know, so that I'm not wasting my time, because everybody in the Ohlone community has to wear a lot of hats, because we're a very small community and we're all doing a lot at once. But what I make clear is that is this like something that can grow or change, and is it a flexible exhibit that our voices will actually matter in developing it. But as far as going to representing a huge community with just one voice, it does get difficult, because, you know, there's 8 different Ohlone languages historically spoken. There's, you know, there's a whole bunch of diversity within the Ohlone community that stretches from San Francisco down to Monterey. And so generally my rule of thumb is I only stick to where my home is at. My home is here in the East Bay, and I have family ties in San Francisco and Santa Clara County, but that's where I stay. I don't try to go down to other areas within the Ohlone region and speak for people who have ancestors in that ground. You know, I try to stay exactly where my family is at, where my villages are at. And it gets hard, because even within my small community, there's a lot of complexity, I guess you could say. And so what I try to do is to try to be as fair as possible, try to listen to what people in my community want, and to try to, you know, you can't make everybody happy, but the things that we do want there's also common, there's similarities and there's commonalities, such as wanting to give a voice to our ancestors, wanting to make sure that our culture today isn't seen as something that's in the past, but it's seen as something that's present and contemporary, as well as being rooted in the ancient as well. So these are things that I try to bring to the table wherever I go.
It's very helpful, thank you.
For me, it's a little bit different, because I'm a Vietnamese advisory community for Children Discovery Museum. So we work with Vietnamese people. So every time they invite us in, it's a whole group of Vietnamese people represent for different groups. And I represent for youth, our parents, and the elderly, you know, so I can speak at different angles. But we all have a goal, have a subject to deal with, a layout pretty in detail, so it's a little bit different than yours. And however, Vietnam, you can see a different part of Vietnam. So we all came from different parts. I'm from Southern, and I came here because of the fall of Saigon. So I spoke on that behalf of how I experienced when I was in Vietnam and when I came here. But the people came earlier than I am. They spoke different. They have different view. So we share different part of the country. The same country, Vietnam, but different tone of the language. A culture, not the same, a different part, a little bit different. So we get to share that with the Children's Museum, and then they write down and they value everything we share, and then we come up with the final decision, what should we put on the museum, so when people come, they all get the message, and they don't have to say, oh, this is north, this is south, this is middle, because the museum, like he said, is open to everybody, and when they come, they get to know what is going on, not only for Vietnamese.
Yeah, I think I would say that, first of all, going into that situation, I'm really aware of the fact that it's an honor and kind of a privilege, to be in this awkward position of representing your culture to all these people. It's something that you hope that the people who are offering the invitation recognize that it's an impossible thing to do with complete integrity, number one. So part of what you do, and I agree with Vince, is that you look for openness. You try to see to what extent the project that's being offered you has opportunities for not only creating a better project, but frankly shifting the awareness and consciousness and values of the people who are administering. I mean, because part of what you're doing is not only acting as a conduit for a resulting project, but you're creating a precedent within the museum that hopefully will be received positively and shape the direction of future projects. So because I really do think that we're in a transitional moment when museums are trying to find their way in this new cultural paradigm. And so to the extent that they can learn from what you do and do it better the next time, that's an opportunity you need to take advantage of. Beyond that, I think it depends on the nature of the project. And I've got, a number of different anecdotes I could share. In some cases, it went pretty well. In other cases, it didn't go so well. But it really, I think, as I said, amounts to opportunities that can be transformative both for the museum and for the community itself.
We want to get into examples, and so if you'd like to share one now, we're going to have other opportunities. Do you have one that's top of your mind?
Well, there are a couple. Like one, and this is something Naja knows probably better than I do. I think as a result of the success of the Question Bridge project, which I think made a point to the museum that I'm interested in doing things that are that act as cultural catalysts for positive social change. So I was they were in the process of renovating the natural history section, which I understood
at the Oakland Museum.
At the Oakland Museum, which I understood was an attempt to really create a completely different kind of viewer experience, so that people living in Northern California had a chance to experience the environment in what seemed, as I listened to the pitch, a radically different way. And as I was listening, it sounded to me as if what they were attempting to do was something that I knew that Native cultures historically did. So my advice to people who were sitting at the table was that they obviously need to not just give lip service to advisors from Native American peoples, but they need to put those people at the center of the process, because what they would like happen to, I guess you could say, middle class, people who come into the museum, that they would like them to transform their relationship to the natural world. To see the natural world through the lens of someone who not only was a manipulator of that place, but was being influenced by the essence of that place. So I thought that was a pretty good idea, and I guess I hoped, that it would evince a real change in the way the project was organized. But my sense was that
Did they?
Well, that wasn't my impression. I think that it was done. I could see the influence of people who are making an effort to try to see it from a different paradigm. But I think it's a pretty radical thing to do. That's why your question is so profound. I mean, how do people themselves who are in leadership positions in institutions, cultural institutions, shift their own consciousness so that they're viewing both their audience and their subject matter from a completely different cultural perspective? That's hard to do. It's hard for anyone to do.
I think they did that with the History Gallery because they had a Native council that really talked deeply about the experience. I think that's why they even called it, if I get this correct, before the other people came. They call, so when you walk into the History Gallery, it's because that was the perspective of the people who were living here before. And so it really was, well, I don't think Vince was on that committee. I asked him. He said he didn't advise, yeah. So
I did consultation.
oh, you did consultation, okay. On the History Gallery?
I wasn't on that committee. So.
Okay, but you did, okay. But that, they did some of that, but I just
Yeah,
wanted
no,
to
I
say
know.
they did.
Like I said, I think that all of this is aspirational. I know that these efforts are being made. But I think as an advisor, what you have to do is not try to come in and fit into the pre-existing system. I mean, you can't put yourself in the position of saying what they want
You're right.
what they want to hear. You have to come in as if you were a fresh voice who have a perspective that they don't have, and hope that what you have to say is transformative.
Does that resonate with also both of you, that you don't want to come in and say, yes, rubber stamp, this is that?
Yeah, I think that what I try to stay away from is just like having this tokenized Ohlone voice where often what happens that I've noticed is that at many museums there's possibly an Ohlone room or a California Indian room or something that's focusing on indigenous people of California. And then after that, it's kind of like we just disappeared. And then there's no follow-up on what Native people are doing today, on what Ohlone people are doing today, on the gold rush, on the missions, on much of anything else. And to the average viewer, it kind of looks like we're just gone. And so, okay. And so what I try to make clear is...
We have too many mics close together, or that'll happen. Sorry.
Sure. And so what I try to make clear is that, this is a contemporary culture. We didn't just go from a pre-contact world to where we're at now with nothing in between. And so, adding pressure and adding pressure to the directors and the developers of the exhibits that there has to be more than just the pre-contact world to today. And I think the Oakland Museum actually gets this point, because what I've noticed is all throughout their history gallery, from the beginning till the end, there's always some added exhibit or feature about California Native people and what we experienced after the contact with Europeans.
Good job.
One other thing. I mean, it occurs to me that what makes this such a challenging thing for museums and for advisors is that all of us are trying to better understand, how do you change someone's heart and mind? How do you do that? Just providing them with information doesn't change their mind necessarily. And I think that's the advantage that a museum has, because it tries to address not only people's cognitive functions, but it tries to touch their hearts.
Yeah.
So I think that if a museum is really open to alternative ways of being transformative, of being change makers, then it may be that your advice can result in a systemic change that results in future projects that are different.
Love that. It kind of goes, there's we touched on this a little, so some of these might be a little redundant, but maybe we can go deeper into this. And this is, if an institution is not ethnically or culturally specific, if it's not identified as that. The usual default is a white Eurocentric perspective. So we'd like to ask how you compare the advisory community work you've done in the various types of organizations. And I don't know, it sounds like I've heard some of the organizations you worked with, but we'd love to hear if you've experienced that and how you compare, maybe, if you've advised with those kinds of institutions that are mainly coming from a perspective, perhaps, of the default. Is that clear?
Yeah, I think I understand. I mean, you're asking, is it a different experience working with a mainstream museum as opposed to an ethnic-specific museum?
Or yeah, and how you compare some of the experiences you've had, maybe advising several different museums where you've seen that experience, and it's sort of is a little deeper into what the last question that we just had, maybe embellishing.
Yeah, I think my sense is that unless the museum is specifically ethnically oriented, I think that every other museum that's part of the master narrative, if you will, would like not to be seen, as only representing a ethno-European position. I think they would like to be seen as reflective of what they recognize as an increasingly diverse reality, cultural reality here. And so the challenge of this whole process is, how do they do that? How do they do that in a way that doesn't cost them patronage that they need? And how do they do that in a way that feels authentic to the diverse communities that are either their neighbors or not? So I think that's why this process and this conversation is happening everywhere. And so the challenge of how you do that is multiple ways. With the Who is Oakland project is a good example, because they initially, when Evelyn Orantes, who's the curator of public practice, and Kelly McKinney, who's Kinley, who's I guess the director of the lab, invited me in. What they had in hand was a report that they had, which was basically an anthropological study of the local communities. It was the Neighborhood Identity Report. I think that's what it was called. And what I saw that they had done is they had done a pretty standard academic analysis of the communities that touch what they considered to be their neighborhood. And they wanted me to come in and somehow represent something that was relevant to those communities. And I said, well, no, I'm not going to do that. Because obviously, if you're going to do anything that feels relevant to the heart of Oakland, there are many other communities outside of the immediate neighborhoods that have a relevant stake. And the museum said yes. So this is the positive example, because they were willing to let me broaden the scope of what Who is Oakland eventually was, so that it included white artists and middle-class artists, and together with African American, Latino, and Asian. And it was, so the hope was that when someone came into that installation, they felt that there was a place where something that touched their lives was there. And it allowed for a really diverse range of things, from what John McCoy was doing, from what Kim Anna was doing, from what Susan Felter was doing. And so I think the challenge was finding some way to unify these very different presences. And I'm not the person to judge how well that worked, but that was what the museum hoped to do. And I think that's an example of the kinds of things that museums want to continue to do in order to continue to feel relevant.
Great, it was successful. You succeeded. Did you want to touch on that, either of you? Because do you consult with a lot of different museums in this area?
Yeah, I like what Chris said about inclusiveness, because I don't think that most people in the Bay Area, maybe I'm just being naive, but I don't think that most people in the Bay Area want this sanitized version of history that just is coming from like a very, Western-centric point of view. I think that because of our reality living here in this, incredibly diverse place, that people want a multitude of voices, and they want different experience, and they want richness, and they want diversity. I mean, that's what I've noticed that people want. They just don't know how to get there often. And so my own perspectives of what I've been doing for about 7-8 years now with museum consultation is I've been working at places where or doing consultation at places where there's often this very colonial history that's presented to people, where the typical history is that these wonderful Spaniards came to California and the Indian people just flocked into these places and they wanted to be there, and then the rest is history, but which we know isn't true at all. And so what I've been doing at the Presidio, at Mission Santa Clara, Mission San Jose, and Mission Dolores, in different areas of the Presidio, like I said, is talking about resistance that came to these places, talking about how people actually weren't that happy that the Spanish were coming here, ways that our culture survived, and the hardships that we had and that we still continue to have today. And I think that people are a lot more receptive to understanding these real issues and understanding that something has to change with how the status quo narrative is right now of this Eurocentric discussion in the missions of colonization in California. And just a lot of people, though, they just don't know how to change this. And with exhibits, what the default is often is people will say, okay, well, we'll put a mortar and a pestle and a couple of arrowheads in a space, and that represents Indian culture. And I'll say, no, it's not that easy. Like our culture in the pre-contact world, and even today, it's beautiful and it's rich. But most of our most beautiful artifacts that show the complex civilization that our ancestors lived in, they're organic materials, and so they decompose over time. And our baskets are one of our main forms of art, and there's only a handful of them that are remaining, and they're mostly abroad in Paris and London and Russia. And I know that there was one that was commissioned by Linda Yamane at the Oakland Museum, and that basket took her 4 years to make by hand, and that was her full-time job, but she was doing it. And so now that it's there, it shows that beauty of Ohlone culture. But what do people replace the mortars and the pestles with? Because when people see that, the first image is, wow, that's not very impressive, And so having images, at least, of the most beautiful aspects of Ohlone culture, I think, is important. Being able to at least put in the minds that there's more that's there besides these things. And then, back to, specific places. And then there also comes issues of values. For an example, in our traditions, when somebody's buried with something, that's meant to stay with them. And I was recently doing consultation work where there was a huge amount of artifacts that they wanted to display. And I found out, after the meetings were over, that they were associated with burials. And so that goes, in complete contrast, and it's contrary to our own values as Ohlone people. So there's ethical issues that come up as well. And I think, though, in this whole dialogue of ethics, of changing the narrative, and of highlighting the vast richness that we have, without always being able to showcase it with artifacts or objects that are present, I think, to me, this is something that museums can do to show this diversity and that this complex reality that we live in today.
Right. I just wanted to ask you, because you seem like a very gentle person, when you come in and they call you in and say, we'd like to consult with you, and you see the mortar and pestle, and and then you have to educate them. Is it it sounds like they're very willing, and especially in this area, very willing to work with you on that. Is it a huge education process, or has it been pretty smooth?
There's some places where it's been smooth, and there's some places that it hasn't been. Some people are they'll say, well, what do you mean? Indians love mortars and pestles. And I'll say, well, I'm an Indian, and there's more than, we have more than that. Like, mortars can be beautiful, but, what you're doing is, I think when you put into the minds of people that museum curation, it's not always about tourism, but it's also about social justice, then it helps awaken people to this reality that you're doing something more than just showing off beautiful things, but you're fighting for the minds and hearts of the people who come to visit museums, to make sure that they're aware of this world that they previously weren't aware of. And that's my main objective that I try to stress to people.
Touched on that social justice, yes, that is beautiful. Were you going to say something, Chris? Just
Well, I was just going to say that one of the things I think you go into these encounters trying to be sensitive to is the tolerance of the museum for controversy. I mean, how willing are they to take a position that might not be read by traditional audiences, or maybe they're bored, as something that is a positive message that would encourage patronage? How willing are they to take positions that might seem critical of the familiar narrative? So you go in listening to hear, are there opportunities to figure out new ways to tell the truth, even though it might be a truth that is a difficult truth from the perspective of the people who are in power.
Did you want to comment also on?
Yes, for the Children Discovery Museum, we have like an event like Children of the Dragon. It will be our 10 years anniversaries coming. And we had Mid-Autumn Festival. Mid-Autumn Festival is like basically celebrating Day for Children. So it's open, all children come in, they're supposed to have fun, they're supposed to have hand-on and, interactive between parents, grandparents, and they have different kind of exhibit, like science, history. They can play with water, the performance, the musical, and then they can, they're a fairy, welcome them at the gate, like they in Disneyland, like the Mid-Autumn Festival. So we make sure that, all the children are welcome. All the adults can take the children here, and this is a fun place. It's don't have to be you have to be Vietnamese to be there, So I really like that event because it's open to everybody. And even though the Children of the Dragon, we celebrate Lunar New Year, we call Tết, T-E-T. It's basically Lunar New Year, but for Vietnamese, we do all kind of traditional there, like how we have ancestor table, what people do in New Year, and dragon dancing, all kind of stuff, and what kind of food. So that's a more specific for Vietnamese culture, but others can learn about our culture. But there's so many events, so many different events at the Children Discovery Museum, and we are so honored to always have the right to put inputs on that before they do something. They always invite us in and say, what do you think? Because so many Vietnamese people here, what do you think? We should do this and that. So this is nice,
I think you're speaking to something that I find is really important is programming often is the way to get folks in. They might not come for exhibitions. Maybe once they're in, they'll get to enjoy exhibitions. But often the programming is the way. It's the easy path to bring folks in because it is welcoming, and then we can do things.
So we outreach to the library, to different communities. They say, hey, let's come celebrate. It's a day for children to have fun, and we got such a big crowd. Even mayor came to our Children Discovery Museum. We have council members, and we get a great support from the local government, That's good.
It occurred to me that one way to deal with the problem of how do you contextualize really difficult information, different kinds of realities. How do you make that not just palatable but transformative? And is to recognize that there's something that floats above the specific content, and that is the message. Like what are you doing with the materials you have to work with? And I just came back from Southeast Asia and went to Cambodia and saw a particularly poignant example of this when you look at what the Cambodian people are doing with the heritage of the Khmer Rouge. There's something called S21, some of you may know about the torture museum that's right in the middle of Phnom Penh. So there you see them, if you will, curating one of the most horrific human tragedies in recent history, within a message that is redemptive not just for them, but for anybody who comes in and wants to know what the nature of human cruelty can be. So you go in and you're subjecting yourself to this really horrific experience. It's akin to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, for example, where you can tell that the people who are designing and curating this have a vision of what the overriding meaning and message of this is. And if you put enough emphasis on that, so that people have opportunities into that message, so that they can leave with something more than just the visceral experience of seeing, a place where people were tortured to death. You leave in a different place than you arrived. So you hope that museum administrators recognize the importance of this sort of meta conversation that can happen between the institution and the audience. You hope that happens. That doesn't always happen. I mean, often it's just a display of what we have. Look, we have it, and you don't. Come take a look.
Bay Area museums do a good job of that. Mission and goals. I also wanted to, is there more of challenges and successes? I would love to hear, so I've heard a little bit about that, and I think that's something we'd like to hear a bit more of, any stories that you've had. And it sounds like you've already told me some of them, but are any other stories, like, tell us a disaster story, because that's where we learn from the disaster. No, ones where you've maybe come in and not felt so valued. Don't name the institution unless they were really far away, maybe. But I don't know if you want. But it's helpful to me to hear where maybe museums' intention, like your story of the mortar and pestle story. Are there any others where you've been called to the table and felt?
I've already given away my disaster story.
Your disaster. But you can tell me
But it wasn't a
success
disaster story. It was just an example of where I think I was asking too much, frankly. But I think, one other example of something that I've done, which I think has an ongoing presence, is when the Port of Oakland and the Oakland Museum were collaborating on what to do with the new terminal that was being built. This goes back to 2005.
The new terminal.
It's in Oakland Airport.
The airport.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's a long time ago. But
Like
so-
thinking of port
No, it was.
ships. Okay.
No, it was when they were building Terminal 3 at the Oakland Airport, and I was a consultant, one of the consultants that were trying to determine what the museum's role was going to be. That's how the vehicle hung new piece got installed. That was one of the results of us sitting around with architectural drawings, looking at lines, saying what to do. So my contribution to that project was the creation of the media wall that's in the baggage claim terminal, and so that was my idea. But the point of it was that it's an opening. It's simply a venue for visual art to be presented. I knew that eventually it would become advertising. It's too choice for it not to be a venue for advertising, but
Is that what it is now? I haven't seen
Not
it since
entirely.
it was. I thought it was.
yeah.
Okay.
No, but yeah, I know it's going that way. But the point was that if for a while it could be a place that could be curated so that work coming from many different artists could be there to inspire people waiting for their bags. That's an opportunity, I think, to invite many, many different points of view into a space that's normally seen as being totally utilitarian.
So when you said I'd like multiple points of view? Were they all, yes,
Yeah,
this is it?
yes,
Okay,
that's what
that was a good success.
Yeah.
Okay. You didn't have to fight that. Yes,
I'd like to talk about challenge and success first, and then I will talk about disaster.
Okay, yay.
Yes, recently last year we get to the final, get the funding from Freeman Foundation, almost $1 million on the exhibition Voyage to Vietnam. We went over like 100 museums. They sent in the proposal and we got it. And yeah, we're so honored to do that, so proud. And thanks to Vietnamese committee, you know, because all of us come in to provide the input. So now the museum get all the information in hand. And you know, they do it. They send a troop to Vietnam, get all the information, different part of Vietnam, see the real thing, water puppet, a real actual water puppet, bring all the information, architect. They work so hard. They work on wood, on plastic. They, you know, to build those subjects. So they bring that picture into the museum to show on the exhibit. So that when the children come and they ready to play.
Is this a permanent exhibition now? The money was to build
No.
a permanent?
No, it's travel. Right now it's in Miami right now. Then we had that grand opening last year at that around this time, and we were there at Children Discovery Museum for the whole year. It's called Voyage to Vietnam, and then the exhibition moved to different 9 different states around the United States. So I talk about Vietnamese culture, about that Lunar New Year. So, you know, that's our challenge. We have that great challenge over 100 museums, like 116 museums, and we won that title, and then we're so successful to work together, to bring it out to the communities, to share with others. Disaster, what is it? Even though we work so hard, we try so hard, but always something happen, like those we think is not breakable. We try to make plastic, but children, you know, when they come, they play so tough, and then they broke it, and then we have to replace it. And in a short time, we can't get the product in time because the exhibit there every day, people get to see it. They come, they want to play with it, you know. Like we have like the like flower festival, so we actually have the flower like yellow flower and cherry blossom. It's called cherry blossom, but it's in my country. It's only bloom in this time of the year. It's about Lunar New Year. And then we have even the Vespa, you know, motorcycle, and then we have the Drysel, you know, the thing with the 3 wheels, you know, so people can try on, and then the dragon head, different musical instrument, all of that, so they can play with it. But then in the middle of the exhibition, it's got broken, so we got to replace, and it takes time to build those stuff because it's shipping from Vietnam. They don't have it from here. But we get a great group from Children Discovery Museum. They have backup and everything. Even Minan, she's down there. She has a family back then, and then they support, you know, they even came here to support us on the grand opening day, and we have backup. Everything turned out good. Yes, and we have handmade to fix those, you know. Yeah, so now it's in Miami now. I don't know where it's gonna go next, but you can check on the Freeman Foundation. Yeah, 5 years, every 5 years they give out that proposal, and whoever get the money. Yeah.
Do you have any other stories of successes or challenges that were, because then I'm going to go on to language translation in a minute.
Sure. My biggest, I guess, success and challenges have been at the place that I work at Mission Dolores, where the success would become from this aspect of being able to be an alumni curator, working at a place that my ancestors were enslaved in back in the 1700s and the 1800s. So my 6th great grandmother and grandfather were there in 1794 and 1802, and their son went to Mission San Jose, where we get a deep connection there. And just being able to be there for me and interpret the story and saying, these are we have a very simple wooden grave marker to them. You know, so being able to say that these are my ancestors, these are people that I'm directly descended from. It makes the point come across very strong. Then, you know, you talk about things like justice, you talk about things like, you know, racism and things that aren't fair and things that aren't right. And for me, it's, you know, it's very personal because I remember, you know, being a California kid, having to go on that, you know, default mission tour at Mission San Jose, and being told things that made me feel, you know, very little, that were very dehumanizing. Like, I'll never forget the tour guide said, the friendly, faithful, peaceful Indians were so happy the Spanish came to California and brought them food and culture and civilization. And that was happening in the 90s when I was a child. And that tour guide, believe it or not, she still works there. She's the curator of that mission. So being able to reinterpret this history and to talk about things like slavery, you know, because that did happen in the missions, talk about racism, talk about, like I said, things that aren't fair. And what I'll do is I'll often talk about it in a 4th grade level, like I'll tell kids, you know, what would happen if somebody came into your house and tried to take your iPad and your clothes and your, you know, your food and your Nutella and everything, you know? Like, you know, would you be happy or would you fight back? What if somebody tried to change your name and separate you from your family and take your language and try to change about every part of you? Would you give up those things or would you keep them? And once you frame it in a way that's relatable, then it makes it so that kids understand. And it makes me feel very good because they're going on a tour that is more truthful and it's more accurate. And it's, for me, the most special and the most wonderful moments when, and it happens pretty often, when there'll be a little you know, kid who's California Indian that's on the tour, and they will like they're usually really shy at first, and then in the middle, once they catch on to this, they'll like come up to me and they'll just whisper, they'll say, I'm an Indian too. And then they'll say like, oh, my grandmother, she was a basket weaver, or my auntie, she sings songs in the roundhouse, or I teach, I learn language from my uncle, or something like that, where you see that, you know, like they're growing up with something that I didn't have when I was growing up, when I was required to do this. And to me, that it makes me feel very proud and good about what I'm doing. But then, at the mission, there's also been, you know, not so good moments, and some of the most disastrous ones. Where I remember, like one time, there was a teacher who wrote a letter to the mission and said that if I wouldn't talk more about the Spanish history, then she would stop coming on the mission tours. And it's not that I ignore the Spanish culture at all, but she said that I talk too much about Ohlone stuff. And so, you know, it's ironic because you can go to just about any other mission and hear about the Spanish narrative. The other thing that was really disastrous was at Mission Dolores, there's just about 6,000 Native people that are buried there as a result of diseases, as a result of short lifespans, and hardships that people face. And there's only recognition right now to 2 people, and those are my family members. But that's unfair. There should be recognition to everybody who is buried there. So I came up with this idea because we have the original archive books that have all the names of every single person that's buried at the mission. And most of the names also give their original names before they were forced to take on adopted Spanish names by force. And so my plan was having a digital projection against the white adobe mission walls and digitally projecting all 6,000 names of every single Indian person buried there with their native names as opposed to the Spanish names that were imposed on them. And I thought the symbolism is we would be projecting those names on a building that they were once banned inside. And again, this is about, you know, it's about justice and just doing the right thing. And we got a grant that was, you know, for almost $1 million of Quest. And we, in order for it to not go to the mission, to the Basilica, which is the church that the mission has its big masses on, we wanted for it to go to this group called the California Mission Foundation. And so they took the grants, and they were just, we would basically make withdrawals from them. And we would just have to write a little synopsis about what we were doing with the money. And when I wrote the proposal for this, they said, we can't fund that because it's racist, because you're only having the names of the Indian people and not all the other people who are buried there. And I thought, well, all these other people have gravestones, and they all have memorials already. And yeah, and so they wouldn't give us the money for it, even though we had the money in the bank. So, that's just like a
You
contempt.
had the money in the bank, but it was a grant.
It was a bequest that went to.
Bequest.
That we,
Bequest.
Yeah, that we took to this foundation so that it would be protected, but they refused to give us the funds. And so, that's just one example of things that we have to go through. And we know that, everybody else that's there has a marker, and all these people deserve recognition too, and they all deserve fairness, and so that's just one of those challenges, probably one of the worst ones that I ever had to experience.
It's heavy. Well, I'd like to just, we have a few more minutes, and I'd like to get into a couple of let's see. We have 12 more minutes. Well, how about, I'm going to do a little bit on language translation, and then I want to just ask a little question about continuing the work. So, language translation is always a big issue, and really the issue is more than just going to Google Translate and putting in the words and having a computer do it. It really is about having authenticity and having voice and having accuracy. And actually, when I was at the Oakland Museum, we called in community, and we tested out with people what voice they'd like to see us use, and we had different translation services, and they all discussed it and voted on it. It was a really good process, and it was helpful to hear a dialogue of people. And so I'd like to hear from all of you about when it's important to translate, and how, and voice, and whose voice, and how have you experienced that in the museums you've worked with translation? I know you two speak other languages and maybe advise on translations. Could you maybe speak to that?
It's important to have the translation at our museum, Discovery Museum, Children Discovery Museum, because most of the parents, when they came here, they don't speak the language, so they have the barrier in language. And, for those newcomers, they don't understand English, but then we want them to bring their children to the museum. So everything we do is have like a code like in English, and then it's a Vietnamese. So when the parents take the children there, they know exactly what is this for.
Who does the translation?
We do.
You as the community?
The communities, we work at it, and then we have the committee like over 10 people, and every quote, the Children Museum asks us, what should we do? Because like I say, we have the north, the middle, the south, and we make sure we use one, that all the people from different part of Vietnam, they understand the Vietnamese.
So you do it as a committee, a community?
Yeah, so we have to pick, and then Vietnamese language, it can be very difficult, because like English, you can say play and learn. You understand, or learn and play the same. The Vietnamese is different, play and learn is different, learn, play is different. So we need to come up, and we need to agree with one tone. Okay, this is good. And then we put it up there. And then for the voyage to Vietnam, we select like a younger voice, actually a voice of a younger, to speak, to tour people around. Like you walk in, you see a beautiful gate, and then you walk in, it's totally like a Disneyland. It's all about the festival that we celebrate. So this little girl talking, oh, we do this, let's go to the flower festival, let's go to the restaurant, let's go play instrument, let's do this and that. And the reason we pick the younger, because it's for our younger generation here. We encourage them to speak the language, to preserve the Vietnamese language. And
Is every every label in every exhibition in Children's Discovery Museum translated?
Most of it.
Okay.
Yes,
Most of it.
especially for the event like the Children of the Dragon, the Mid-Autumn, the Voyage to Vietnam. Everything has to be translated. Yeah, so people understand. And yes, and then the children, like especially I have my girls. Both of my girls, they came to museum when they was little, 3 years old, and they learned the language. They prefer to speak in English, but we speak Vietnamese at home. They spoke back to me in English. But when we took them to the museum, they see this Vietnamese. They recognize it because I send them to Vietnamese on Sunday school. So they really, they're like, hey mom, I know that. And then when they hear that little girl was speaking, touring them around, they said, oh, she's little, she can speak Vietnamese. And that's just like, it's an encouragement, like have their positive identity, even though they American Vietnamese born here, but it's good for them to know the language and know that where we came from. Yes.
Do you want to speak to it?
Sure.
Many languages. And
Yes,
different languages.
so my heritage language is Chochenyo, which is one of the Ohlone languages, and it's historically spoken just about right here, so in the East Bay, from Richmond down to San Jose. And I love my language. That's the thing that I think, besides my family and a partner, that I love the most. It's one of the most special things to me, and it just does so much for me in understanding the beauty and the complexity of the world before anybody else was here. And I think with Chochenyo, it's so special because when you hear it, you can. It's like it's so. It just has this like melodic sound to it, where it sounds like a song. And whenever I do museum work with Chochenyo, I ask that if it's possible to have a soundscape where people can actually hear the language as opposed to just reading it. And so there's been the Oakland Museum. They did a really good job at that. When you walk into the history gallery, you see me and my little cousin Amaya speaking in Chochenyo for a little brief moments. So again, having a child, and the DCSA Museum that I've been doing a consultation with for Mission Santa Clara is that we're going to work on having young speakers in Chochenyo who will speak in our language, so that people can hear that it's not going away. And it's a difficult situation for us in some ways because we only have about 5 conversationally fluent speakers, and we have about 20 speakers who are learning right now, about 20. And so, it's as endangered, it's an endangered language, but the fact is that it stopped being spoken for about 70 years. So the fact that we have speakers today, it's nothing short of a miracle. And it's because of all of the documentation that exists from before that allow us to relearn it and to speak it again. And having that heard at museums, for me, it makes me feel very proud, and it makes me feel very happy because it shows that despite everything that happened to us, that this is something that just won't go away. It's permanent. It's pretty special.
Would you like to talk to translations at all?
Well, I guess, but I would say that I sympathize with the challenge of people who are doing installations, exhibitions that inherently belong to one culture that speaks a different language than their typical audience. It's similar to the kind of challenge that a film producer has, deciding whether to lip sync a language or do captions. I think it's always better to do captions. And if you think about why that's true, because you get a dual message, you get to hear the language, even though you're not understanding it. But you're hearing it in the words that belong to the people on the screen as opposed to the written language. That feels more authentic than having people's voices, imposed over these. Even if you do it skillfully, it always feels phony. So I think that's conceptually, the principle I would suggest, that you bring to that problem.
That's great. Last question. So this is something we dealt with also at the museum. We had long-term, years-long advisory committees that would meet once a month, and it's really labor intensive for museums, and it's hard to do, and there's not always a reason to meet. You don't want to just have draining your advisors, your community folks, if there's not really something you want to present to them. So it's a hard one. Sometimes it's just bringing folks in for a specific exhibition or a program. But I'm just wondering, when you're called in, whether it's just one time or of a long period of time, the question of feeling valued and having a relationship continue and feeling like now this museum, I feel a relationship to the museum, but also I feel valued. And I was asking you that earlier, even if maybe your idea, your suggestion isn't taken, but you feel heard, or you feel like, yes, this is a museum that I trust. How. So I think the question is what does that look like? What would tell you that you're being valued, even if an idea or suggestion was not taken at that particular time? And if the relationship was one time, call you in for one meeting or a series of meetings, tell me how that might look and how that might feel to you, because I think that's important to all of us, not feeling that the criticism that institutions are experiences. You come into our community, you take our intellectual property, or you drain us, and then you're gone. And I'd like to hear suggestions for all of us, what that would look like, how you'd feel valued, and what that relationship might look like after. Yeah, is that?
Want me to start? Well, I think that a lot of it has to do with the conversational dynamic that's happening at the table. I mean, I think people can tell whether they're being listened to, whether their point of view is being respected or not. And I think as long as the institution is clear about what its expectations are, what resources are available, so that expectations don't get raised, that can't be fulfilled because of lack of resources. I mean, I had an interesting challenge with Who's Oakland, given that they wanted this, and granted, I increased the scope of it beyond what they had initially envisioned, but it had to be all done in 6 months or something that you would really want to do in 2 years. But it was clear up front that those were the constraints. And so everyone was sort of working together within those limited parameters. And I think as long as all those things are done straightforwardly and professionally, and as long as the dialogue feels as if it's collegial, when it's happening, then everyone will leave the process feeling respected, I think.
Anything to add?
For us, we feel really special at our Children Discovery Museum. Our name was engraved in the stone, built in the wall out there. So when you walk in, you see all the name of the advisors. That's wonderful. I didn't even think of that, And when you walk in, you feel like museum is your own. Like he said before, like spiritual place. For me, it's like a healing place. Like we came here after the fall of Saigon, and we have. I'm pretty sensitive about that issue because my father was killed by communists. My grandfather was killed by communists. So April 30, we call it Black April, and I talk about it in the community. I make sure the younger generation understand why we're here, and. Of course, there are other people came here just like an international student, and they like children of communists or whatever. So all kind of people come to museum. We make sure that when we come there, there's no you are before 1975, you after 1975, nothing of that. We make sure this is a healing place. This is a peaceful place. Everybody can go there. Everybody can get the same message. This is all focused on children. there's no political issue here.
Your relationship is long-term with them, though, right?
Mhm.
You have a long-term,
Yeah, long-term.
years long.
Yeah,
okay,
years
and
with
so
them.
you feel valued, probably just by the longevity
Yeah,
also, and heard.
but for the
Yeah.
new, because on our committee there's like almost 20 people, and they come from they represent different group of Vietnamese, like Girl Scout, those like from a government, those different kind of non-profit. So I have a chance to get to know them, to learn more about them. Something that I don't know, and they have a chance to learn about myself and the things that I work. I will focus on the children at risk, something like that. And but the Children Discovery Museum, we're really grateful for everything they have done. They treat us very special, there's always special meal after the meeting. And then she home cook, They have money, they can order, but no, she want to do something special to show appreciation. And we always like have like meeting like before the grand opening, and then the feedback, like after we celebration, the outcomes, So we keep the relationship even though the event is over. But we keep going with another event, and then I'm so happy to see get more people coming to the different events of the Children Museum, like thousands and thousands of people coming. So happy. And even now my girls, they grow up, one in college, second year in college, the other one in junior. We still go to Children Discovery Museum.
Yep, thank you. Would you like to address that, and then we'll open up for Q&A? What is the
Sure.
idea of feeling valued?
Yeah, what I've realized is during consultation talks and such, just listening to the dialogue that occurs during those talks, and seeing how people are receptive or not receptive to what I'm saying. And I could usually tell a lot based on body language. Or I remember one time I gave a talk in Los Angeles to a group of museum professionals, and I was the only brown person there, and I was also the only person who was probably under 70 there. And and I just remember thinking, okay, I'm gonna do this anyway, And so I did it, and when I walked out, a few months later, I heard that one of the people there said I was the sour grape in an otherwise pleasant glass of wine. The person who told me that said, good job. Because it's going against the status quo that's often taught, and showing that we need to do more. And this relates because, the body language during that was closed and reserved, and nobody wanted to hear about a new narrative or about a different way of doing things. And for me, though, feeling valued, it's about having a conversation. And if people aren't going to implement my thoughts, then just be honest about it. Like that's for me the best part is just saying, we have spatial or we have economic limits. And exactly, and if those things aren't implemented, then as long as there's honesty that's there, I don't feel bad about it, But if people are just going to waste my time, I'm a busy person like everybody else here is, I'm sure, and it doesn't feel good to waste your time and go to these meetings if people aren't going to use what you have to say at all in any way, shape, or form. But if there is an open discussion about that, I can walk away feeling pretty accomplished. At least I put some minds into people where they might not have been otherwise.
Yeah, that is great. I love that. That's something for us to keep in mind, and I'd like to open it up to, is this feedback, or is it? Sounds like it to me. Okay, so we have about 20 minutes, I think, and love to hear from folks. Neva from Oakland Museum. Boy, you guys got a lot of play tonight, because you do great work, so please, Neva.
I'll just try to speak.
I'll repeat the question also.
Okay, I won't try to be long-winded. So for me, I think what I'm hearing explicitly explicitly is this idea of museums serving as a catalyst for social change, and that does to me suggests that there are systemic cultural shifts that need to happen at an institutional level. And also, I think that there is also that sort of altruistic sort of core assumption that the arts naturally and organically does that, which is why I think there's often, what you're calling out as sort of, when we kind of move along the spectrum of what it means to be transformative and what it means to get to that point of reconciliation, these are social justice issues, but I don't know of a museum that has like a policy around social justice. And so I'm curious, like in your advisory capacity, are you working with boards and governance? This feels like a governance conversation as well, around sort of really inserting social justice as a part of, reclaiming that space at an institutional level.
Could everyone hear that? Okay, good.
If people would stand up and we'll
Yeah,
talk about
standing
along
up
the way,
would be,
yeah,
yeah.
that'll help.
Okay.
We did hear it though, thank
You did, okay, great. Yeah, could you address that? Or anyone?
Yeah. Well, I think that, I agree with you that isn't the first notion in the minds of boards, for example. But that's because of the legacy, the history, as I was saying. And as long as the culture as a whole feels as if it needs museums as a place to display their version of why things are so cool, it's going to be hard for them to reconcile that with an imperative to be an agent for change. But I think the way around that, and short of having boards evolve, having successful installations that meet the goals and missions of the museum, but still provide catalysts for different experiences. Those kinds of things can happen, but ultimately I think what we're all trying to do is redefine what the role of art is, from something that is, most times valuable but not really very useful. So we're trying to shift that, so people understand that there's really a utility to art. And that's not hard to do if you think about it, but it does require a redefinition of the way social change happens. For example, it's really hard to think of any transformative moment in any culture's history that wasn't instigated by something that you could define as a performance, that didn't have theater. Gandhi, those were theatrical events. They were scripted and planned, and they were intended. So if you recognize that art has always, in one form or another, been at the pivot point where transformational political social changes happen, then you can, and if you link that to the role that a museum has as an ongoing representative of what culture means in a given society, then those things don't seem so alien. But I do think they would feel alien to a lot of people who really think of art as a representative of a pleasure principle. We have to shift that definition.
Great. Anyone want to say anything else to that, or should we?
Okay, so I agree with what Chris is saying as well, is that, being able to show art also as being a form of social justice, is that something that you're getting? Yeah, I know that I work with a lot of artists who do, like one of the foundations of their art is reinterpreting their history through their own vision and using art to do so. And I'm currently curating this exhibit at the Maidu Museum, which is in Roseville, and it's called We Are Now, We Were Then. And it's focusing on art as a way to tell the story of California Indian perspectives and how language is incorporated in all of this. Because one thing that's very, that gives me a lot of hope and that I see a lot of people doing in my community is they're factoring in indigenous languages into their artwork, and that's the way that they keep their languages alive. There's this one gentleman who's a good friend of mine named Alan Wallace, who he created this thing called the Gold Rush Rock Opera, which is a rock opera that is only sung in the Nisenan language, which is the area north of Sacramento. And there's songs that talk about the beginning in the beginning of their songs are focused on the pre-contact times. And then it goes on to talking about the genocide that occurred against California Native people, and then about the things that are happening today. And it's sung in a contemporary way, but it's sung by people from his own community. And there's no separation in that between art and social justice and telling the truth. And so I think that if we see more forms, and if more forms are implemented into museums that show this holistic thing of art coming together with social justice and us narrating our own stories, as opposed to just having an abstract piece of art that lets people entirely decide and make their own meaning, like if they're kind of nudged to what the artist is saying, then I think people come across that they get more information out of that. And it's silly.
That is fascinating about revolution in the museum.
Just one other thing that occurred to me. If we did a little thought experiment and where you only looked at the art production of a given culture over history, only looked at that, and totally divorced that from the actual political, cultural history. Could you tell by looking at the art laid out on a timeline when there was a decisive change? Of course you could. That's not an accident. Right? And you can tell when the Meiji regime era started just by looking at the art. Right? So people who think that there's a disconnect between those things aren't thinking it broadly enough.
But I hear your question is really specific in the mandate of the museum, like saying, is this intentionality is around the museums and curating, not the artists who are creating it, but us presenting more of you all, right? Yes, Sandina, you want to stand up, please?
I wanted to make a case for diversity in museums, exhibits, and all. And anecdotally, I heard that at the Young, when they did the Chicano art exhibit, it was like the most wildly attended exhibit. And I think when museums are faced with budget issues and decisions around what can we afford to do and what kind of shows to promote, we need to remind them that these shows are popular and that people want to see themselves reflected in the exhibits, in the what's on display and who's performing where and things like that, and that will bring in new audiences and encourage more people like you did for years with the community days at the Oakland Museum. Fortunately, continue beyond your time there, and that's something that creates the relevancy of these institutions that are, like Chris said, oftentimes repositories of the past that need to be revived and brought up to date. I want to encourage more of that.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Another questions? I saw the woman next, yes, you, and then it was Adam and is that Susan? Hi. How about that? You 1, 2, 3. So you first, yes, please.
Hi. You guys spoke a lot to exhibitions and a little bit to programming, and I was kind of curious as to what you could see potentially being the role of advisors, or what you would hope for in terms of continuing messaging beyond once it's a built exhibition, for example, and how it's interpreted, for example, by tour guides or other people, and how you kind of prepare people for potentially controversy or issues like facing a more diverse perspective, which argue people want and want to be able to talk about. So how you might, if you have ideas of strategies for doing that?
I think the problem from the point of view of, a consultant is that a lot of the basic assumptions about the way programming would relate to the installation are a fait accompli. I mean, they thought that through already. They have some sense of what the budget allocations would be for one and the other, how programming might work. So it isn't as if they're asking me at the beginning, how to structure that. They're saying, given that we know that we want, this component to relate to that, how can you help us do all of that better? Isn't that fair to say?
Most of it.
That's
Not all.
that's been my experience.
Not when Christine's involved.
So you're saying ideally it would be built into the plan?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I would say that the earlier in the conceptual thinking you bring in somebody who is likely to produce a paradigm shift or a different reorientation, the better. That's easy to say sitting up here. I know that when you're dealing with budgets and missions and long-range planning, it's harder to do. But that would be my advice, because that's when you're most likely to get the most transformative change in what you end up doing.
Anyone else want to answer her question? It was Adam and then Susan, yes? Right?
Yeah, so I was just wondering, my name's Adam. I was at the Oakland Museum in the same time as Indra, and I was at Earth Museum of Anthropology. But while I was at the Oakland Museum and in projects that I've done that have involved community co-curation, one of the issues that I kept running up against, and I wonder if you guys might be able to speak to this, or other people maybe have experienced this too, is we were so zealous about recruiting, so this is, I guess, a combo question. How do we recruit community members to participate in the projects that we have in mind? And going back to this question of encouraging this feeling of value, or that our community members that we're working with are valued. We kept running up against the problem of not being able to recruit people to participate in projects and curating and co-curating exhibits with us because of this feeling of my story is not important. My story is not the history of California. My story is not representative of the iconic history of an African American in California in the '60s, or the experience of being this prototypical hippie of the '60s, whatever it was. People saw their stories as too divergent or too uninteresting or too insignificant, and we had this constant effort of kind of encouraging confidence and boosting confidence, and it was kind of always a process of no, like we're really valuable.
So you had trouble recruiting people to co-curate.
Recruiting and encouraging confidence in people's stories and perspectives of their own.
So your question is how to get people to
motivate
them to do that?
Exactly. Yeah. What are your thoughts about that?
Incentivize? Did you pay them? No.
That's one thing.
So, any ideas, thoughts about that? Well, the first part might be a longer answer, and we only have a few minutes. But I like the second part; it's kind of compelling, and that is that people maybe don't think their story is interesting, or they can't speak for a whole community. Is there? You have ideas about bringing people?
I know most of you here, the majority live up here, so I don't know if anybody come down to San Jose and visits the Children Discovery Museum, but on behalf of Children Discovery Museum, I would like to invite you come once. Be a child, just walk in there. You feel great. It's not all about Vietnamese. It's have the upstairs, it's have different sections, it's have different cultures. It's all about science, physics, gravity, everything the kids need to learn, play, and enjoy. And what we do that is when we go out there, even though I'm Vietnamese, I go out there, I outreach to the Vietnamese community, I outreach to different communities, not only Vietnamese. I invite them to take their children, come have fun and learn with them. We went to different local library. We went to a different school district. Even teachers, they took their children, the student on the field trip to Children Discovery Museum, and parents chaperone, and they all had like a productive day. It's not like something for children, but adult, we look at a different level, So come.
I want to jump in and just answer that, because I think sometimes we are on such short time frames and it makes it difficult to recruit people. I was just given 3 days to invite someone to come in to be an advisor at my museum, and I really am not happy about it. I'm going to talk to them later about it, because I was like, that's not right. But it's a long process, and we have to build relationships, and I think that's my job now, is I'm building relationships. I've got to sustain them. I'm not going to go in and ask them one time to come in, and I think you all started with the advisory committees we had at the Oakland Museum, and you had a lot of them success. They're still there to this day. So I don't know if you have ideas about that, about bringing folks in, because I know there's a lot of humility, or also, nobody has wanted to hear stories from communities in the past. What are your thoughts on that, on getting people, some long-term building relationship?
I think that if you think about what StoryCorps does, for example, okay.
You're familiar with StoryCorps, yes? 3 minutes.
But what they do is they've created an alternative channel for everyday people to contribute their voices. I think that's ultimately the most creative way to make sure you get the broadest range of different kinds of voices involved with what you're doing.
But this is actually asking them to curate, put something in a gallery. So, there's the audio, but
I'm using
that's
that as an exemplar.
You
have to think creatively about how to create a forum. That's what Question Bridge is, for example. It's a way to create an alternative way for everyday people to feel as if their voices are acknowledged.
Great. Did you want to quickly answer that, or did you want to? Susan, do you have a quick?
I do have a quick question. I'll pick it up later. I've got it for time.
At the bar next door.
I'll pick it up.
I
I will say this. I really like the phrase alternative forms of change making. And what I wanted to talk about was you guys are outsiders, but you get the way museums do and do not function. And I would encourage all of us to be thinking about what are those alternative forms of change making that we can have. Chris, you said that phrase, and I just went, oh my gosh, I'm holding on to it. Because I think that's what we don't understand that we can do. And I think that that's what the whole community has to figure out how to shape so that we can get more of the diverse voices. So thanks for saying that.
Well, you're educating our next generation of museum professionals. So.
I'm working on it.
Did you want to say?
Oh, I can go on it further.
So we have to wrap up, but I want to thank our panelists. It's fascinating. You're wonderful. Thank you all so much. I'm going to visit all of you. I'll be down there. Nadja wants to encourage us to go next door. Hold on.
A great round of applause for our panelists. And Indra, wonderful hostess and hostess. Thank you so much. And thanks to the La Peña staff. And I'm told to go. We'll post a video of this program on the Cultural Connections YouTube channel soonish. And now we invite you to come next door on the corner to the Story Cloud to join us for drinks and food and Irish dancing. We have a table reserved, and please don't forget to fill out your evaluation forms and give them to Jessica. And a reminder, April program is Saturday, April 23rd, JFKU. Look on